Okay, we are getting ready to start let's get you out from between the two cameras. Fantastic. Make sure everybody's distanced nicely. All right, for the win. We are going to get into the 8th chapter. Now, I think the 8th chapter, at least the way it starts out, it's a little heady. It's a little heady. It's a little tough to enter into. I think it's fascinating and interesting and worth discussing and all that. But, you okay there, Chief? Hey, you okay? All right. I think it's worth discussing and all that. But I've noticed a Sanskrit text is based on the idea that you already know the language. A Sanskrit text is based on the idea that you already know the language. How do we know that? Because it's written in Sanskrit, obviously for somebody to read, and therefore there's an automatic assumption, if you're over the age of maybe 6, that you can do the math and realize, wow, the person intended for me to be able to speak the language. You guys with me so far? All right, we're getting started. Train's leaving the station. Time to wake up, everybody. Here we go. If you write a book in Sanskrit, what do you assume about your audience? That they can read Sanskrit. There you go, right? By the way, Sanskrit is an Anglicization of Sanskrit. They're both acceptable, but Sanskrit, there's no ah sound in Sanskrit. There's and ah, and it's Sanskrit. It's not Sanskrit. However, words get anglicized. Karma and guru and words like that, they get modified a little bit when they get pronounced in English, and so it's acceptable. But just as an FYI, it's Sanskrit. Okay, but even scholars say Sanskrit. Even scholars will say that. Western scholars, no Indian scholar would say that. Okay, so there's an assumption, if a book's written in Sanskrit, that everybody who's reading it can read Sanskrit, because otherwise, how would they have access to the book? If you write a book in English, you're assuming your readership speaks English. When you post to Instagram, you're assuming the people you post speak the language you're writing in. You got it? It's pretty simple stuff, right? Sometimes, like I follow a bunch of Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys, and so they'll write in Portuguese. I almost said Brazilian. They'll write in Portuguese, and then they'll also write in English. Because when you hit that C translation, they butcher it, because artificial intelligence can't translate language. It's too nuanced. There's too much inflection and nuance, and there's too many words are too multivalent. They can be used in a variety of ways, and it requires it's just like 5 different ways times 5 different ways times 5 different ways times 5 different ways, and it just gets to be too much, and the computer will pick probable ones, but it's not actually intelligent, and therefore even if it's stated to be heuristic and able to learn by doing it, it's never happened yet. So they just like sold it, the gnarliest artificial intelligence translation program known to man, multiple times over to Microsoft, and it didn't pass the test. When MIT tested it, it failed miserably, just like all the other ones before it. So language is very nuanced. It's very nuanced. And so a lot of times these Brazilian guys that I follow, they'll write in Portuguese, their native tongue, and then they'll make their own translation into English. And if you hit the C translation, and you look at what was written in Portuguese that was translated to English, and then what was written in English, they're totally different. You guys following this? You with me? All right. Okay. So, I find that the sections of the Gita, or any Vedic text, where they get into a deep dive into words which are profoundly of that language. Love in English is a really complicated term. Right? If you look in if you look at Greek, they have the word eros, which is sexual love. They have the word agape, which is spiritual platonic love. And they have the word philos, which is also kind of a philosophical love. Agape is more like almost spiritual. Philos is more philosophical. Philos is where you get the words like pedophile, where, because it's somebody who loves children. Or, you get the word, the word philosophy. Sophia means knowledge, and so love of knowledge. But, if you say, I'm an Indiophile or an Anglophile or whatever it is, that the phile in that word is philos. Okay, so sorry about that. Just the word that came to mind, and I decided to be edgy and use it. My apologies. So, in English, you just got one word. You got love. And so you're using love for all the different ways that the word, there's 3 different words in Greek. You got 2 words in Spanish for love. What are they? Amor and desear. Desear. Yeah. Right? Yeah. You use the word like that also. No?
I never do, but yeah, it could be.
Te deseo?
What about like the quiero, right?
Quiero. How I got the desear? How I got that quiero? Querer is used. Huh? Querer. Te quiero. Yeah, I'm sorry. I totally butchered it. Showed my ignorance of Spanish. Te quiero. You say that, right? Mm-hmm. Te amo. You say that, right? 2 different meanings. 2 different meanings. You follow? One is more a platonic love, and the other one's a more romantic love. So other languages will have multiple words for love to help you distinguish between just the majorly different sentiments of love that there are in the world. We don't have that. We have. I mean, you can say I want you. We can say I desire you. We have words like that, but we use the word love for all these things. And so usually when you translate these words into English, they all get translated as love. And it's left up to you to figure out what they mean. Now, the ability to figure out what those words mean when they're used in context, based on the rest of the sentence and stuff like that, and who's talking to whom, when, it's really high. That's why computers can't do it. There's just so much nuance. I mean, I'm ready to take a stand. Like I took a stand, there's not going to be any more riots, so I'm ready to take another stand. My other stand is they'll never make artificial intelligence. They'll make really cool computers that can do binary stuff that can be broken down to binary code, but our consciousness can't be broken down to binary code, and therefore they can't do it. They've been trying forever, and they've been failing forever, and it's always like just around the corner. And this last one was like, it was big, man. They were making a huge deal out of it. They sold it for like $1 billion, some crazy amount of money. I don't know what it was, maybe $500 million, some huge amount of money, and it fell flat. There's just so much nuance that goes into being able to decipher a language. So I find the sections of the Gita which are the most difficult to understand are the ones where words are being used in a highly specialized way that is fundamentally grounded in Sanskrit. The Gita is a song. Songs are written in a language. In that sense, they're untranslatable. The song is Sanskrit as much as it's written in Sanskrit. Did you follow that? There's just too much cultural stuff attached to it, too much baggage, too much depth, too much shared understanding of a group of people from a particular place and time. It's too cultural to really be properly translated in its fullness into another language. There's a fire in the house. That's relatively easy. It's a universal sentiment. You're the soul and not the body. It gets a little more difficult. What do you mean when you say soul? What do you mean when you say body, right? You are consciousness. That's a tough one. What's the word for consciousness in Spanish? Conciencia. And what's the word for conscience in Spanish? Conciencia. So the word for conscience, you have a conscience, and the word for consciousness are the same in Spanish. We couldn't have those two words being the same in English. That would be rough. We use those words in such a different way, isn't it? Anyway, there's just so much stuff like this. There's just so much stuff like this. I mean, you get all the neutral language people, all the Latinx people, and it's just like, oh my God. I mean, you talk about a gendered language like Sanskrit or Spanish, what are you going to do? Rewrite the whole language? Teach people an entirely different way to speak to satisfy a couple % of the population? How's that fair? We have elections. We vote. They voted. We took a bunch of polls. 98% of Spanish-speaking people weren't into it.
They voted to change the language?
I mean, they didn't vote. There's no official Spanish court that votes, and then everybody has to do what they say. We don't live in a draconian society. But they've taken polls. They've taken polls in Spanish-speaking countries to see who's into it. It's like this much. You follow? It's like a bunch of people from Los Angeles. It's totally colonial. It's like let's have a bunch of United States people. We can't even say Americans without being bigoted because they're also Americans. We can't even say North Americans because Canada and Mexico are both in North America. But anyway, you take a bunch of United States people and they're telling a bunch of people south of the border how they should speak because they're woke and everybody else isn't. Anyway, it's like if you take a gendered language, the whole idea of a gendered language, there's just so much baggage attached to that. Intergenerational, over hundreds, if not thousands of years. When you get into these romance languages, you're going back thousands of years to their immediate predecessors. In the form of Latin. So the sections of go see mommy. Go see mommy. Go help her open the door. She's got all that stuff in her hands. Oh my God. My daughter just came in, grabbed a bunch of stuff. We're trying to help her open the door. She's like, I got it. My 3-year-old daughter says, I got it. It's cool. I got it. No worries.
Continue
on. A 3-year-old has such an amazing command of English. A 3-year-old has such an amazing command of English. A level of English that most non-native speakers can't even pull off after 5-10 years of practicing. The inflection in her voice, the I got it, the calming in the way she says it, the accent, intonation, the cadence of her speech. You could be doing English as a second language for a decade, 20 years, and not be able to match that. There's a saying that the tumbler's son, like a tumbler, like a contortionist, the tumbler's son, no matter how well taught, could never walk straight. Because he's been learning how to somersault from the time he was born. So he could never he could never stand up straight because it's just not his nature. Language is like that. You learn to think in language. You think in words. You think in language. Your ability to think is directly related to your ability to speak. It's why it's good to increase your vocabulary. You can have deeper thoughts. Anyway, it's a big long wind up. But the sections of the text that require you to learn new language are the toughest to appreciate, and therefore people space out the most of them. So let's not space out. Let's be on point. Let's focus. We're at the end of the 7th chapter. I purposely didn't finish the chapter because new words get introduced. Let's go back to text 29. Intelligent persons who are endeavoring for liberation from old age and death, those people take refuge in me. Prabhupada translates as in devotional service. The last verse says they worship me. And this verse says they take refuge in me. So because the last verse says, the last line of the last verse is they take worship of me, and the second half of the first line of this verse is they take refuge in me, it's pretty easy. If you say you're serving somebody and taking refuge in them, you could also call that devotional service. So that's where Prabhupada gets that from. Just, there's so much nuance there of noticing the continuation of themes. Mam bhajante, they worship me. And then mam ashritya, they take shelter of me. And those get mixed together, and Prabhupada says they take refuge in me in devotional service. See that? He's making sure you remember the word service was used in the last line. They are actually Brahman. They are actually Brahman. Hey, come or go, man, but don't come and go. Ah, I see. All right, you get a pass. It's the mask protocol. That makes sense. They are Brahman. What does that mean? They are actually Brahman. Does that make you cringe a little bit? Does it make you cringe to hear they are actually Brahman? Why does it make you cringe? You don't know why it should make you cringe. Why does it make you cringe? You don't know. Why do you think it makes you cringe?
You want me to answer it?
Yeah, I want you to answer it. Judy, Tadeo, Ian, Ravi, be great to see you guys. Love to see your smiling faces.
I think it makes me cringe because it's like saying that a human being is like the originator.
Oh-ho! I'm impressed. Hey, hey. That was pretty fancy. Welcome, Gopal. For a Vaishnav, for someone schooled in our tradition, to hear that someone has become Brahman sounds too much like they've become God. And it gives us the heebie-jeebies. You ever heard that word before? Really?
Yeah.
That's some archaic slang. Gives you the heebie-jeebies. It really rubs you the wrong way. Isn't it? Yeah. They are Brahman. Te Brahma. It literally says they are Brahman. Because they entirely know everything about transcendental activities. Tat vidu kritsnam. They are Brahman because it's implied, because they know that completely. Adhyatma karma cha akilam. They know everything in relationship to the soul completely, and they also know karma entirely. They know karma completely, And they know adhyatma completely. They know adhyatma completely. Adhyatma means, that's a word that you can't really translate into English. Now, atma means oneself in Sanskrit. Literally, it means oneself. It's a simple reflexive pronoun to refer to oneself. Atma also means mind, it also means body, it also means spirit, it also means consciousness. Krishna is called Paramatma, the Supreme Soul. This is Adhyatma. Adhyatma could also mean Supreme Soul. The prefix Adi could also mean Supreme Soul. It could also mean things in relationship to the self. In other words, spiritual topics. If you look at this word Adhyatma, which first appears in the Upanishads, in those books where the term is introduced, it means things in relationship to the self. But it could also mean oversoul, or super soul, or supreme soul. They are Brahman because they know the super soul, they know everything in relationship to the self. Either translation works. But the thing is, it states they're Brahman, and then because of what comes next, it implies it's because of this. You follow? And so Prabhupada explains away the difficult line, not by getting rid of it, but by showing that there's some sort of like a cause and effect thing. Because they know this, therefore they're considered to be Brahman. Because you know God completely, because you love God completely, therefore you're divine. You follow? It chafes a little less, right? Okay. We haven't even entered yet. We're still just warming up. The 8th chapter in the beginning is where we actually get into this. Those in full consciousness of me, who know me, the Supreme Lord, to be the governing principle of the material manifestation, the governing principle of the demigods, and the governing principle of all methods of sacrifice, those people who know me in that way can understand and know me, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even at the time of death. There's just so much here. Why does it matter what you know at the time of death? Because in ancient Indian culture, reincarnation was a plausibility structure. Everybody accepted it. I mean, not everybody, but most people. Enough people that it was like Christianity in the U.S. in the 1800s. If you didn't believe it, you might get lynched. Everybody accepted it. I mean, there was no lynching going on in India, but you get the point. So, everybody accepted reincarnation. And what you thought of when you died determined what happened to you in your next iteration, in your next incarnation. You know, sometimes we say incarnation, like Krishna incarnated. That's not actually the right term. Incarnate means in flesh. Carne, like carne asada. Carne means like carnage. It means flesh. Do we believe that when Krishna comes into this world as an avatar means crosses down into this world, that he takes on a body made of flesh? No. Therefore, sometimes Indian pundits will be like, I don't like the word incarnation because it's not actually accurate. Prabhupada liked the word incarnation. Why would Prabhupada choose the word incarnation when it's technically and etymologically wrong and it conveys the wrong notion about Krishna?
Because it was a word that was understood by people.
It's just the best word we had. You follow? Avatar is the word in Sanskrit. Avatar means, ava means down, and tar means to cross down into this world. How epic is that term? You follow? That term is like gorgeous. It's like a beautiful term. It's like amazing, right? You ready for this? Avatar can also be used for a living entity who comes from the spiritual world, like an angel who incarnates in the world, not just for God. So there's words that will modify the word avatar to indicate to you whether the avatar is a living entity like an angel or if it's the Lord himself. There's 6 types of avatars listed in the Bhagavatam. There's the guna avatars, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. It's not Shiva, by the way, it's Shiva. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, who are in charge of goodness, passion, and ignorance. Brahma's the creator, Vishnu's the maintainer, Shiva's the destroyer. Then you've got Shakti Avesh avatars. Avatars which are Shakti Avesh, which are imbued with the power of the Lord. That would be like an angel coming down from heaven to do something wonderful in this world. Shakti Avesh avatar. An avatar, an angel who's come down, who's imbued with a ray of the Lord's power. You follow? Beautiful stuff, right? And then you've got your Leela avatars. Those are the different incarnations of the Lord that come down to perform specific Leelas in the world. That's another word, Leela. There's no word in English. Pastime? Leela is an unforced spiritual act performed by the Lord, not really even by devotees, properly speaking. The Leela is a wonderful, miraculous act performed by the Lord where the Lord demonstrates dramatically some beautiful, miraculous, amazing thing, either in this world or in that world. That's Leela. Good name, right? Madhurya Leela is the sweet pastimes, the honey pastimes. But the word Madhurya, even though it means honey, from madhu, from mud. Madhu means honey, mud means sweet. So Madhurya Leela, the sweet pastimes. Mud means sweet and Madhurya means like of sweetness. The pastimes of sweetness, which you can also render as sweet pastimes. Those pastimes, it doesn't just mean sweet pastimes. Those pastimes, when it says sweet pastimes, it means specifically, it means the romantic pastimes of the Lord. Specifically, it means that. Even the Lord's pastimes with Lakshmi, Vishnu's pastimes with Lakshmi in Vaikuntha are not called Madhurya Leela. They're Dasya Rasa. It's Lakshmi is in the mood of being a servant, even though she's married to the Lord as his consort. The romantic life of God is Krishna and Vrindavan, and maybe to a lesser extent, Krishna and Dwarka with Rukmini. And then Ram Leela is kind of right on the border. We don't really know what to do with Ram Leela. It kind of like it's half in, half out. Sometimes we argue for it, sometimes we argue against it. But Madhurya Leela specifically refers to Krishna's pastimes of romance, romantic love of God. So the word means sweet, but it doesn't mean sweet. It doesn't mean sweet. It means romantic. Even though it literally means sweet, that's not how it's used conventionally in our sacred literature. You follow? You see how much you got to know? There's the Leela avatars, the Guna avatars, that's the Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. The Leela avatars like Varaha and Narasimha would be Leela avatars. The Manvantar avatars, the avatars that come at specific times to do specific things that have to happen in the world on a schedule. The Manvantar avatars. Then the Shakti-avesh avatars. Then you have the Shrishti avatars, which would be Purusha avatars is what you call them. They're involved in the Shrishti and the creation of the world. That's Karna Dakashai Vishnu, Garbha Dakashai Vishnu, and Kshira Dakashai Vishnu. Vishnu that lays down Shai and sleeps. Like when you put the deeds to sleep, you say Shayana, it's the same word, Shai. Garbo Dakashai, Karno Dakashai, it's Udaka. Kshira Udaka, ocean of milk. Karna Udaka, ocean of creation. Water of creation. Literally. Water of creation. And then Garbhodaka, the Garbha Udaka, the ocean of creation. Like Karna means creation. Garbha also means creation. Karna means ultimate creation. And Garbha means like womb or seed, which refers to the specific seed of the universe which is created from the pores of the Lord. The Lord has unlimited universes emanating from his pores along with his breathing as he lays in the Karnodaka, the causal ocean. Then he incarnates in each one of those oceans and he creates the universe. Then within that created universe, he lays down the ocean of milk and is also available to people in 3 different forms. They're all Shrishti avatars. They're all avatars for creation. They're called the Purusha avatars. Purusha avatars. Shakti-avesh, angels coming down this world. Guna, 3 modes. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. Leela, different pastimes. Manvantar, different pastimes on a schedule. Purusha, these 3 forms of Vishnu that create the world. And then number 6, it's spaced out. What's number 6? I said Shakti-avesh. Help me out here, somebody. I'm drawing up a blank. You won't find it in the Gita. You're not going to look it up. Gopal, you know? Ian, Tadeo, what's wrong with you? Yuga. Who said Yuga? Darshan, thank you, man. Look at that. I got to start get worried, man, that you were all as dumb as me. Yuga avatars. The Yuga avatars also, they come on a schedule like the Manvantar avatars. But the Manvantar avatars come during the reign of the various Manus. But the Yuga avatars specifically appear during each of the 4 yugas. That now requires you to understand cyclic time in Sanskrit, where things move from more orderly through entropy into more chaotic times. And there's more pious time, like Satya Yuga, which devolves into Treta Yuga, where it becomes more about ritual. The world becomes more ritualistic and less meditational. And it devolves into Dwapar Yuga, where deity worship reigns. And then in Kali Yuga, the most degraded age, it's Kirtan, which liberates one. So although we participate in ritual through yagna, and although we do deity worship, the holy name is the most prominent thing that we do because it's the Yuga Dharma, the Dharma of the age. But it's ultimately the highest Dharma of every age. So anyway, I'll keep going and we could just go on forever. And I could give you guys a whole catechism off of just this idea of language. We could just go from one word that's undefined that you guys don't understand to another word you don't understand, and we can just go on and on and on. You follow? Then we got to talk about the name. Well, there's Gonanam. Gonanam are indirect names of God, like Ishwar, Lord. And then there's Mukyanam, primary names of God, like Devaki Nandan, the giver of joy to Devaki. The names of Krishna, which specify his loving relationships with his devotees, are considered to be primary because they talk about Krishna's emotional sweet life, which is called Ras, Krishna's sweet life. Ras means flavor. And we can just go on like this and on. And we can look at where these words come from and what they mean. And you get an education, and pretty soon you're living in a different world where you speak a different language. Like my wife, she got an ice cream maker for Christmas, which was really a present for me. So the children bought my wife an ice cream maker, which is like the bane of my existence. You know, I have to do cardio every day now, so I can like eat a little bit of ice cream every day. And like she's giving me like a spoonful of ice cream every day, and I'm angry about it. And so I'm like hangry all day long. Because when I eat ice cream, I like to eat like I can easily kill a quart, maybe a pint to a pint and a half in a sitting after a full meal without sweating it. I'm not like, oh, I just binged and I need to, like, I'm feeling like that was really cool. I'm feeling like I got something solid done today. I can kill like a pint and a half of ice cream twice a day. After a full meal. Like, I'm like, oh, that was a full meal. And I'm like, is there ice cream? And vegan ice creams now are better than regular ice cream. Somebody's telling me, like, Ian was telling me, I have a hard time with this whole vegan thing. I'm really struggling. I'm like, well, what do you like? He's like, I like cheese. I'm like, oh, it's rough, isn't it, man? The struggle is real. And he's like, I like ice cream. I'm like, what are you talking about? You like ice cream? Give me a break. There's such good vegan ice cream out there. You're not missing anything. Are you kidding me? Like, give me a break, I thought there was good vegan ice cream out there until my wife started making vegan ice cream. Now I'm just like, whoa. So, I'm sorry, I'm on none of these computers, so her Facebook comes up, and I'm looking at all her messages coming up about her hair for her wedding. Yeah, thank you. So, she got an ice cream maker, and she made, before we went vegan, Reed's, the candy ginger guys, they used to make an ice cream. It was candy ginger ice cream that my wife liked. And then we went cruelty free. We went ahimsa. So, and then I don't even know if they make it anymore, but we haven't had it in 15 years, whatever it is. So, my wife was like, I'm going to make some ginger ice cream. So I'm like, yeah, sounds great. So she got some uncrystallized ginger from Trader Joe's at like the best price in town, and she diced it up, and she made this caramel ice cream with chunks of ginger in it. Right? It was fantastic. And so I indulged. I had a little tiny bit, like a spoonful. I was angry for like the whole day. And then my son was like, these flavors don't match. And my wife was telling me about my stupid kid, Rukta, who didn't appreciate the brilliance of her ice cream. And she said, oh, Rukta ate the ice cream, but he said it was Ras Abhas. And I immediately corrected her. I mean Ras Abhas, not Ras Abhas, but Ras Abhas. Ras Abhas is a term from Sanskrit dramaturgy that's used when you have a scene in a dramatic performance that doesn't fit. For instance, if two lovers are meeting, let's say Krishna and Radharani are meeting, and Radharani was to say to Krishna, we will embrace and then I will smell your head. Smelling of the head is what parents do to children. When you embrace your child, you smell their head. And it's like a parental thing, because like when babies are born, they smell so good. You're like walking around like a flower, and you smell them all the time. And then they grow up, but they're still your little kid. And so you think of them as being your little kid. And so you show your affection, and you embrace them when you meet with them, and then you smell their head. That's done from a parent towards a child. It would never be done from one lover towards another. You follow? So when my wife wanted to describe to me that Rukta didn't like the ice cream because the ginger didn't go with the caramel, she said, oh, Rukta thought it was Ras Abhas. You follow? And I was immediately like, it pained my ears. I said, Ras Abhas. Because like her Australian butchering of the Sanskrit compound rasa and abhas disturbed me so much. So I immediately corrected her and said, no, Ras Abhas. And I made her like repeat it like 108 times. That's another Sanskrit joke, right? You follow? So you start to learn our theology, and it becomes a whole other way of looking at the world. You look at the world differently. And it's deep. It's not like we're not like some new kid on the block, some new cult, new religious movement, and we came up with 5 words in our lexicon. We've got thousands of years of language, a whole language. So you don't just learn a glossary of terms we came up with. It's a whole thing. Like I was watching that Nexium cult. And they had a few words that were specific to their group. That they, it was like inner speak. And I had to learn the glossary. So when they were talking about stuff, and they assumed everybody knew what they were talking about, I could understand it. But you want to understand our culture? You got to spend a lifetime. You got to spend a lifetime. Am I conveying this to you? So they are Brahman, got to know that term, because they understand Adhyatma. And if you understand me as the Supreme Lord, Adi Daiva, and you understand me as the Master of all sacrifices, Adi Yagya, and you understand me as the Lord of all beings, Adi Bhuta, if you understand all that, Adi Daiva, Adi Bhuta, Adi Yagya, Adhyatma, Karma, and Brahman. 6 terms. So the last verse said they are Brahman because they understand Adhyatma and Karma fully. This one says, if you know me along with Adi Daiva, Adi Yagya, and Adi Bhuta, 6 terms, then at the time of death you'll be liberated, implying that you accept reincarnation and that you also accept the principle that what you remember at the time you die determines where you go in your next lifetime. Now, if what you remember when you die determines where you go in your next lifetime, what does that mean? Like, what do you need to do? You need to carefully govern your life so that you think of Krishna all the time, right? But it also creates a problem that how could Krishna be so lame that you spent a lifetime loving Krishna, but then right at the moment you died, somebody said like, what's that? And you like look up at a tree, and then they like slit your throat, and then like, you follow? That's a concern to people in our tradition. You guys are laughing because it sounds so dumb. That's a concern for our people. So there's stuff in our scriptures that say, if for some reason a devotee's attention is pulled away from Krishna at the time of death, Krishna will forcibly enter into their mind. Because the Lord is kind. And so the implications of a loving deity and how that modifies even a straightforward statement, those things are there because for our tradition that's an important point. You actually have to take the responsibility of what you think about. You got to curate your feed. But not in some weird obsessive way where Krishna is this weird unkind deity that like tortures you if you blow it for 1/2 a second. In a way where you take responsibility under normal circumstances, but in an, what do they call it? What's the word? Exigent circumstances. Like cops don't need search warrants in exigent circumstances. If they can demonstrate they heard somebody screaming, help me, I'm being murdered, then they don't need a search warrant. They can just rush into your house. You follow? So in an exigent circumstance, an emergency circumstance where you couldn't think of Krishna because something happened, then Krishna will think of you. And so you can't be cheated out of your loving relationship with Krishna. You follow this? We go down this rabbit hole far. There's a statement that says you shouldn't have any other desires. So our pundits say that means you can't ask Krishna for anything. And then they say, but this word tava means, generally speaking, you don't have other desires. Because there's a word tava at the end of that word. Anyabilasita shunyam. Devoid of any other desires, or primary definition of bhakti that was written 500 years ago. That itself was based on several definitions of bhakti that go back thousands of years. So our framer 500 years ago borrowed from definitions of bhakti that existed for thousands of years, and he put together 500 years ago a really tight version. And the first line is Anyabilasita shunyam, devoid of any other desire. But that word ta means tava. It means ness, desireness. And then our pundit explains, he says, and he writes a commentary on it. They would write a book and then they'd write a commentary on the book. Because you can't understand the book. Because they wrote the book in Sanskrit verses so they could be memorized, because that's just the way we write. We write in 32 syllable, 4 lines of 8 syllables, or sometimes 4 lines of 11 syllables. And the lines have to have certain things, and they have to end like on long and high notes and stuff like that. It's a whole thing. It's like writing rhyming poetry. So they write these beautiful verses, but the verses are pregnant. Sometimes they have multiple meanings woven into them purposefully. So then they'll write a commentary on the book they wrote, because when you read their book in Sanskrit, you won't be able to understand it. So they have to write a commentary to tell you what each word means. And the commentators are like, this word means this word means this word can mean this or this. If you take this meaning, then this meaning of this word changes to this. That's what the commentary is. The commentary is going through each word and telling you what each word means, and then sometimes giving multiple meanings and giving other verses from other texts that authenticate that these are legitimate readings. And then telling you, well, this word means this and this word means this, and piecing the whole thing together so you get 4 or 5 different possibilities from reading it. So that verse means, generally speaking, you don't have other desires. But one of our commentators says, but if you fall off a cliff and you cry out, Krishna, please save me, that's not a defect, because the principle of not asking for Krishna anything is superseded by the principle of always taking shelter of Krishna in every circumstance. So if a circumstance comes up in a devotee's life where they have no other shelter but Krishna, and they're in a very, very dangerous situation, then they'll cry out to Krishna to save them. Like Draupadi is the famous example, who when her husbands failed her, when her elders failed her, when she was abandoned by everybody, she reached out to Krishna. There's a famous story. It was told by Gaur Govinda Maharaj. I've never found it in any scripture. It's a beautiful story. Krishna was crying one day, looking very morose in Vaikuntha. Lakshmi Devi asked him, why are you crying? The Lord was silent. He wouldn't talk to her. He said, just wait, I'm waiting. And after some time, he was looking very anxious. Sometime he began to smile very broadly. And Lakshmi was like amazed, like what was going on? And Krishna said, my devotee was suffering. And I wanted to help her, but I couldn't because she wouldn't let me. And finally she surrendered and asked me for my help. And on the bridge of her tears, I'm now going to her rescue. And that was Krishna in Dwarka, waiting for Draupadi to cry out, hey Govinda, and cry out to him and give him the opportunity to then give her the unlimited cloth so that she couldn't be disrobed in the assembly. Of course, you have to know that pastime to appreciate the beauty of the story. You have to understand Krishna versus, Narayan. You have to understand the idea of the importance of us being a part of our own salvation and the synergistic nature of reality. You see how it all comes together? And when it all comes together right, it's like a meal. It's like that ginger and that caramel and everything put together and just right. Like my wife is now learning how to make ice cream. It's a whole thing. Somehow or other, when you cool fat down, it bonds with oxygen, and that's what aerates the ice cream. So gelato is 50-50, milk and cream. Ice cream is 75-25, cream to milk. You follow? Sorbet is from juice. Frozen yogurt is from yogurt. Somehow the acidification of yogurt allows the fat molecules in the yogurt to bond more appropriately, and it still gets aerated, but it's more thick than ice cream, which is very thick. It aerates, it increases its volume 2.5, 3-fold. You're buying air when you buy ice cream. It's like when you buy a soda, you're buying water. When you buy ice cream, you're buying air. But anyway, but if you use something without enough fat, so you can use olive oil. If you're making vegan ice cream, you can use olive oil. And the olive oil will bond with the air and aerate. You can use peanut butter. You can use peanut butter. And the peanuts have a high fat content, and so they work. See, we're thinking you can use any oil. We're starting to get crazy. Could we put rice bran oil in there or whatever? We're trying to figure it out because I might open an ice cream store at some point, a vegan ice cream store. So my wife's getting crazy with all the different flavors. And so when you put together the perfect recipe and you get all the amounts down, you become expert. Then when you think about Krishna's pastimes, they come to life. Then when you think about our philosophy, it comes to life and it paints a beautiful picture, and you can enter into it because you speak the language. Did you guys follow that? So we have 6 terms introduced. We don't know what they are. Adhyatma, Adidaiva, Adibhuta, Adiyagya, Karma, Brahman. Adhyatma, Adidaiva, Adibhuta, Adiyagya, Karma, and Brahman. 6 terms. And Arjuna says, what is Brahman? What is Adhyatma? What is Karma? What is Adibhuta? What is Adidaiva? Please explain this to me. So even Arjuna himself doesn't know what these terms mean. Krishna says, you got to know me with all these things. And Arjuna's like, okay, what do they mean? So for someone who knows Sanskrit, these terms require to be defined. That's how philosophical and precise they are. Do you understand? For someone who speaks Sanskrit, these terms require a definition because they are not typical terms. You follow this? What is Adi Yagya? And how does the Adi Yagya, how does he live in this body? That, of course, indicates the Adi Yagya is a person. How can those engaged in devotional service know at the time of death? It just says, how can one know you? How are you known by the self-control at the time of death? See how Prabhupada throws in there, engage in devotional service? Because the last verse is about you worship me, you take shelter of me, and if you do that and do this. So Prabhupada wants to make sure that we don't miss it. But Krishna just uses another term. He says, niyata atma, a self that's controlled, a controlled self. Niyata atma bhi. How am I known? How are you known at the time of death? By a self-controlled person. Well, what's a self-controlled person? The person is bhajante, I'm worshiping you, dridha brata, with firm vows, mama shricha, and taking shelter of you. Because that was mentioned in the previous verses. And so Krishna then doesn't bother saying that every time. We need it to be said to us every time because we can't keep track. But in Sanskrit, you can just say, oh, that person that we were talking about. Does that make sense? And now Krishna answers. Brahman is Akshar. Akshar means the undecaying. Brahman is Akshar. Brahman is the undecaying. What does that mean? Is the self undecaying? Yes. Are our scriptures undecaying? Yes. Is God undecaying? Yes. It's a pretty multivalent definition, isn't it? Akshar is oftentimes used for God. But it's indefinite. It's a little troublesome, isn't it? Now it says, Brahma Paramam Aksharam. So you could say Brahman is the supreme Akshar. That starts to sound a little bit more like the Supreme Lord. All right, so now Brahman's God. Okay? Now if one of the 6 terms is God, what can the other 5 terms not be? God. You follow? So if you want to see another of the 6 terms as one of the other 5 terms is God, then Brahman can no longer be God. But we've got some room to breathe because Akshar means undecaying. Are you guys paying attention? Give me a thumbs up if you actually follow this. This whole thing was a warm-up. So when I got into this, you guys would be able to follow this. Gopal, give me a thumbs up if you understand it. If you don't give me a thumbs up. All right. It's okay. We haven't hung out enough. You hang with me enough, you'll be able to follow this. Are you guys following this? Look at your books, don't look at me anymore. Look at your books, don't look at me anymore. Brahman, this is verse 3. Aksharam Brahma Paramam. So Brahman is Akshar. Akshar Paramam. Don't look at me, look at your books. Brahman is the supreme Akshar. Alright, so Akshar Akshar literally means undecaying. Unfallen. Akshar means unfallen. Unfallen. Akshay means undecaying. Akshar means unfallen. Alright, so Brahman is Akshar. Later on in the Gita, Krishna will say, don't look at me. That's what Krishna's going to say later on in the Gita. Don't make eye contact with me. Keep looking at your book. Actually, you can look up at me for a second. I'm starting to feel lonely. Okay, so later on in the Gita, Krishna will say that Dvavi Mao Purushao Loke Kshara Akshara Eva Cha Kshara Sarvani Bhutani Kutasta Akshara Uchate. There are 2 types of beings in this world, unfallen and fallen. The word Akshar is used for unfallen. One who's achieved the summit of self-realization is called Akshar. Uttama Purusha tu anya, but the supreme being is another. Paramatma iti udakrita is known as Paramatma, the supreme soul. Yo lokachayam avisha bivarti avyayam ishwadam. He's always been the Lord, and he enters into this world and maintains it. So Krishna later on says, you can be a self-realized soul and you're called Akshar, but the Supreme Lord is different. You follow? Yasmaksharatitoham aksharat api cha uttama, because I am beyond both the fallen and unfallen living entity. Yasmat aksharatitoham aksharat api chotama yoloke vede cha pratita purushottama. I am known in this world. Tasmat loke vede cha pratita purushottama. I'm known in this world as Purushottam, the Supreme Being. So, later on in the Gita, Krishna will say, some living entities who are self-realized can be called akshar, but I am distinct from them because I'm the source of everything. You follow? So it's wild what you can do, right? From the Gita itself, you can get an understanding of what the word akshar means. Akshar was used in the 3rd chapter to refer to the Vedas. Yajna comes from akshar. It comes from the Vedas. In that context, where does yajna come from? Where's the idea of yajna come from? It comes from the scriptures, right? So in that sense, akshar would have to mean the Vedas. You follow? Let me double check my math there. It might say it comes from Brahman, which means the Vedas, and then it says Brahman comes from akshar. I think that's actually what it says. Yeah, it says that karma, yajna comes from karma, karma comes from Brahman, Brahman comes from akshar. So in the 3rd chapter it says Brahman comes from akshar. In this chapter it says Brahman is akshar. You understand? The terms are multivalent, they get used in different ways. You got to know the language to make sense out of it. And in sections like this, even Arjuna himself is saying, what's the deal? What do these terms mean? And Krishna's being somewhat enigmatic in his answers. He's giving you some room to breathe. He's not saying it's 100% this or that. So he's saying Brahman is the supreme akshar. That would indicate God. It could also mean the self. Of course, if you say Brahman's the self, none of the last 5 terms can be the self. You follow? So you got to pick your poison. It's either going to be that Brahman is God or Brahman is the self. But depending on which one of those you pick, you're going to have to go a different direction with the other terms. You follow? Adhyatma is swabhav. Now, swabhav means nature, like your nature. Like if you're like, hey, Raviji. Is Ravi still here? Ravi's there. Ravi, let me see your smiling face. Okay. My one Indian friend on the call isn't showing up. If you said to somebody from India, you're like, that person, he's a thief. Like, why is he stealing? Is he hungry? Is he poor? No, it's just his swabhav. It's in his nature. So swabhav means like one's own nature. Bhava means like nature, and swa means one's own. So adhyatma is one's own nature. You follow? So that's in relation to the self, but what does that mean, swabhava, right? So it must mean someone's spiritual nature, which is an unusual usage of the term swabhav. Normally it's used to mean one's material nature. But that wouldn't work here because we're talking about spiritual subjects, and so you got to kind of figure out what you want to do with that term swabhava. So Prabhupada goes with the indestructible transcendental living entity is called Brahman, because it said they are Brahman. You follow? So Prabhupada's going with that. Okay? Because in the last chapter it said they are Brahman, so Prabhupada's just running with that. And the eternal nature is called Adhyatma. So the nature of that spiritual being is called Adhyatma. That works. Adi means in relationship to, as well as over. So it can be one's nature is their Adhyatma. So we are Brahman, and our nature, the nature of the self, the ultimate nature of the self, is Adhyatma. Action pertaining to the development of the material bodies is called karma. Bhuta bhava udbhava kada. Visarga karma sangita. Karma sangita. It's known as karma, which is visarga, creates. Bhuta bhava, the nature of bodies, being, udbhava kala, and it creates living entities. So what creates your material body is called karma. So you are Brahman. Your nature as a spirit soul is your swabhava. When that nature as a spirit soul gets misdirected, it then creates the material body, and that's called karma. You follow? And karma is your thoughts as well as your deeds. Like when Krishna talks about Brahma karma, karma of Brahmanas, he says being equipoised and self-controlled and peaceful and forgiving are the actions of Brahmins. And being, you follow? And being generous is the, and magnanimous and heroic is the action of a Kshatriya. But included within the list of actions are mental states, because your mental states creates who you are. Because what you think about is where you go. So even your mental state is also your karma, not just your action. Did you guys follow this? So the Brahman is the self. Adhyatma is the nature of the self. When that nature gets misdirected towards the material world and creates your material body out of your desires, that's called karma. You seeing this? The actual physical nature, which is constantly changing, is called bhuta bhava. Adi bhuta is ksharo bhava. Remember how I said akshara means unfallen? So kshara means fallen. So the kshara bhava, the changing, falling, permutating, permutable nature, that's called adi bhuta. Bhuta means being. That's which relates to a being in the sense of a material being in the sense of a body. Like a ghost is called a bhuta. From bu, which means to be, like the verb ser in Spanish, which gives you estamos, estuvimos. So the root, the verbal root, bu in Sanskrit, gives you so many words like being, beingness, like that. And so to be, all that stuff comes from the Sanskrit root. But when it becomes bhuta, it's like something which has the quality of being, and it refers specifically to a body, a physical object. So you're Brahman, you have a nature. When you misdirect that nature towards the material world, it creates a body, and that body is called adibhuta. And now you have Brahman, Adhyatma, Brahman, Adhyatma, Brahman, Adhyatma, Karma, Adibhuta. Swabhava is the defining term of Adhyatma. Brahman is Akshar, unfallen. You got it? Adhyatma is Swabhav, one's nature. Karma is what creates bodies. Adibhuta is the bodies themselves. You got this? The universal form of the Lord, which includes all the demigods like those of the sun and moon, is called Adidaiva. Daiva means divine. The word div is the Sanskrit root here. It's where you get the English word divine. Daiva means divinity. Adidaiva means of divinity. And so if you have a body, that body is controlled by material nature. Gravity, entropy, so many things. That's Adidaiva. It's the universal control. It's personified by the demigods. Listen to this very carefully. Maybe that's why ghosts say boo. I thought the same thing, Casey. It's not. But I thought the same thing. I just didn't say it because it was like, I thought it was too cheesy. But you and me are not just wearing blue. We both got that classic, hilarious sense of humor. And so, good on you. I don't know if I have been wearing these things too far up on my thingamabob. And so, yeah.
Can you twist it so it's facing this way?
Stop trying to control me. I think we're good enough. That was a joke when I said stop trying to control me. I mean, it's not. I hate it when people try to control me, but I was being silly. You are Brahman. You're an eternal soul. You have a nature of consciousness. When you misdirect that consciousness, that creates your body. That's why what you think of is what you become. Then the body's created. That's your adibhuta. You got now adhyatma. You got Brahman, adhyatma, karma, and adibhuta is the actual body. Once you get a body, you're controlled by the demigods. That's adidaiva. It's divine. Entropy, karma, gravity, the laws of physics, moral and ethical laws, fundamental principles of reality like numbers. These are all ways in which the Lord creates logic and reason and stability in the universe so that we can come closer to the Lord, who's the supreme logic, supreme reason, supreme morality, supreme goodness. And so those things were viewed not just as forces at play, universal forces, but they ultimately had universal people behind the forces. Do you follow that? So Adidaiva, it was God's hand touching the world. When you looked and you saw logic in the world, you understood the Lord was logical. When you looked and saw reason within the world, you saw that the Lord was reasonable. When you looked and saw love in the world, you realized love was possible in the world. Obviously, you have to troubleshoot it so you don't have to start saying, well, drugs and rape and all sorts of horrible things are in the world. So you got to troubleshoot it. But this gives you an idea that everything comes from that one source. And so even when you create a body for yourself, the Lord's still looking out for you, looking over you, watching over you, giving you opportunities, teaching you lessons, without forcing your hand too much. And I, the Supreme Lord, represented as a super soul in the heart of every living being, am called Adi Yagya. So the Lord is the Adi Yagya, the master of sacrifice. And Krishna says that in multiple places in the Gita. He says, Aham hi sarva yagyanam bhokta cha prabhu evacha. I'm the master and enjoyer of all sacrifices. He says, Bhoktaram yagya tapasam sarva loka maheshwaram. I'm the great Lord of all the worlds and the enjoyer of all sacrifices. He's in many places. Krishna identifies himself with the yagya as the enjoyer of the yagya. So the Adi Yagya is the Lord himself, the Lord who's existing within the body. And so he's also in the body with us. He's smelling and seeing everything we do, which is why we can't hide. His eyes aren't just the sun and the moon watching everything we do. He's in our heart. So now you've got the living entity is Brahman, has a nature of consciousness, can turn towards the material or spiritual world. If you turn towards the material world, you create a body for yourself. That's karma. The actual body is called adibhuta. You're governed by the universal laws. That's adidaiva. And the Lord is always there with you. That's Adi Yagya. Because he's all good. And whoever at the end of his life quits his body remembering me alone at once attains my nature. Of this there's no doubt. Whatever state of being one remembers when one quits the body, that state he'll attain without fail. It's just like it's an axiom. It's not even like Krishna argues for it. It's just a universal axiom. He's stating it for the sake of completeness, but this was well understood at the time, that the quality of your consciousness determined what happened to you. It's not just what you do. It's how you think. It's who you are. It's what you stand for. It's your heart. It's your actions and it's your heart. Sometimes we start by fixing our actions, then we start to attack and deal with our wicked mind. Sometimes we fix our mind and our actions change. It can go either way. No problem. You can work on both ends. That's why it's cognitive and behavioral therapy. You reframe the way you look at the world, and you also reframe your behavior in the world. You see a nice flow. Generally, when I talk about this, and we'll finish with this, please listen very carefully as I attempt to tie this all together. Generally, when I talk about this section, I talk about a triangle. The Lord who creates the world and creates the living entities. The Lord creates the world, that's Adidaiva. He controls the world through universal forces. Living entities are related to the Lord, the living entities are related to the world through their karma. The Lord, Adi Yagya. The living entity, Brahman. The material world, Adibhuta. How are we related to the material world? Through our karma. How are we related? How is the material world related to the Lord? As Adidaiva. And how are we related to the Lord? When we turn our swabhav or nature towards Krishna, and that becomes bhakti and taking shelter of him, which was just indicated, that's adhyatma. And so in a good theology, you have three things: God, self, and world, and you have a way in which all those things are related. These 6 items are those 3 items and all the ways that they're related. In this sense, you don't need to know Sanskrit. You can appreciate these verses. However, as we start to dig in deeper, there's a story in here. It's a story. You are Brahman. You have a nature of consciousness. If you turn it towards the material world, that's going to create bodies for you. That's Brahman, Adhyatma, Karma, and Adibhuta. And then you're controlled by material nature and the laws of the universe. That's Adidaiva. But you can also turn towards the Lord who's in your own heart. That's Adiyagya. And that responsibility is yours. Krishna can't take away that responsibility because you have free will. And love without free will isn't love. It tells a story. It tells a story of the fall of the soul. It also, by telling the story of the fall of the soul, tells you the story of the redemption and reconciliation of the soul with God. It's a theology. It's the same thing that happened in the 7th chapter. The 7th chapter laid out a theology. I'm the source of earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Mind, intelligence, and false ego. Everything comes from me. You can see everything in relation to me, and I'm beyond everything. Now he's saying, hey, let's look at the old Upanishads. And let's look at the language they used to indicate how I'm the source of everything. And how the whole world can be seen as coming from me. It's another theology. 7th chapter was a theology with earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Another old way of viewing the world, but a little easier to understand. This was also a theology using Upanishadic language. You can appreciate the triangle, soul, God, and world, and how they're related. We're related to the world through karma, to the Lord through bhakti, swabhava, our adhyatma, and the Lord is related to the world through the material forces of the world. We can do it that way. We can also do it as a story of the fall and redemption of the soul and where we went wrong and how we can turn it all around. And Krishna's saying he's in the body. It's like, it makes it very sweet because it's saying I'm never that far away from you. I'm always right here with you. It's actually a very sweet thing. So we might understand it philosophically to start with, but it becomes very romantic as you develop in your spiritual life. You feel Krishna's always with you. You feel that. You experience that. It's a real thing. The same way you experience you're hanging out with somebody that you love and care about. You feel Krishna's present in your life. You see it. It becomes undeniable. It becomes indefatigable. It becomes a permanent facet of your life. It becomes something unquestionable. You know, Gopal, you still with us? I want you to stay with us for many years. I'm hoping we grow old together. If it's your time and you got to check out, I am 100% certain, without a doubt, that Krishna will wrap everything up for you very, very sweetly. I've always seen it happen in the life of devotees. I've always seen it happen. I've never seen it not happen. You chant japa, you be a good devotee, you bow down to your guru and the Lord, you keep a nice attitude, you try to see the big picture. And whatever you go through, no matter what happens, at the end, Krishna will make it all make sense. It'll all come together. It'll be a beautiful, perfect moment. You know, there's this movie called The Last Samurai. It stars Tom Cruise, who's just a real idiot, like in real life. But I like the movie. The movie's about samurai culture. I like samurai culture. I like martial culture. I like cultures where men give their lives for a cause they believe in. Anyway, at the end of the movie, they break out a machine gun and they kill the samurai warrior who wears armor into battle to fight against modern machinery. He fights with a bow and arrow and a sword against gun-wielding enemies because he won't sully himself to give up his tradition. He'd rather die on the battlefield in the honor that was given to him by his tribe, wielding the weapons of his culture, than like embrace. You know, the king of Jaipur went to England one time. He got a 500-gallon water tank made and filled it with Ganga Jal so he would never have to bathe in the water of the meat eaters in England. And so he bathed only in Ganga Jal his whole trip. The chikora bird refuses to like drink from a well. It always looks up and it drinks rainwater. It wants to drink something divine. It wants to look up. It's always looking up. It's refusing to sully itself by, dipping into the trough of this material world like a pig. and it always keeps its eyes up. Its neck is always bent upwards. Samutkanta, an eagerness, expecting Krishna's mercy. Devotees are likened to chakora birds in our scriptures. So, sometimes you'll have a dark night of the soul, but you'll get that magic moment. So when that warrior died and he got mowed down by machine gun fire, the screen changed and it became, the cherry blossoms were falling, which is just like the most beautiful time in the world. You ever go to Japan, they have cherry blossom trees all over the place. Springtime hits and the cherry blossoms all fall, and it's like a big festival. It's a big cultural festival in Japan. It's very beautiful. I've been there in Japan for it. I'd like to go see the cherry blossoms here. I love cherry blossoms. I love that incredible purple, whitish look and how they fall. And it's like there's a few days where it's just absolutely magical. The cherry blossoms are falling. He's dying of his wounds, and he gets that moment. He gets a good death. The reason why disgraced samurai would commit seppuku and they would disembowel themselves ritually is in case they did something ignoble and they did something which was defaming. They could rectify themselves and have a good death by killing themselves and showing nobility. And it was so important to them to die right. That they did something to die wrong. They'd rather kill themselves and go through that pain and be able to just like feel like I made things right. I regained my honor. It was a fail-safe. So they always had the opportunity to regain their honor. People look at this and they're like, oh my God, like it doesn't make any sense to me, and like you got to cut your finger off and yakuza and like that. Not yakuza. There's no word yakuza in Japanese. Yakuza. And so nobody gets it. I listen to this stuff and I'm like, those are my people. I totally get it. I definitely want to die a good death. I would definitely rather die on the battlefield than die some kind of coward. Devotees always die good deaths. Every time. There was one devotee, his name was, he was a sannyasi. He was a black sannyasi, one of the biggest leaders in our movement. Prabhupada, his name was, I don't know why his name is escaping me for a moment. He was the first devotee to go to Japan. And maybe it's on purpose I'm not remembering his name. He was the first to go to Japan. He was gay, and he took sannyas, took a lifelong vow of celibacy. He couldn't keep it. And he had a few sordid moments and came and went from the movement a few times. And Prabhupada kept bringing him back. His name was Sudama. And he eventually left and kind of did a transgendered thing for a minute. And I think got into some I think he became a sex worker or something like that and got AIDS. Had a fairly rough and tumble life. Anyway, he was dying of AIDS at some really seedy hotel up in the Bay Area. And Tamal Krishnamaj, his old friend, went there and got him. And said, come back, and rented him an apartment in Los Angeles. And he spent the last 3 months of his life, after being out for 15, 20 years. 20 years he was gone. He spent the last 3-4 months of his life with us. We took care of him. We cooked for him. We did kirtan for him. We sat with him every day. We spent time with him. And he left this world with the devotees doing kirtan. Prabhupada one time said to him, if you go to Japan, I'll personally arrange for you to go back to the spiritual world. Prabhupada said that to him. And he did almost everything he could possibly do to get away from it. I had a real tough minute there, for the bulk of his adult years. He probably died when he was in his late 40s, early 50s. So he got a good 20 years of just not making it work. He was only in the Hare Krishna movement for maybe 5 years before he just couldn't cope. Somehow or other, at the end of his life, he was dragged back to the temple and surrounded by devotees and left this world like a king. Left this world like a champ. Expressing wonderful realizations, with a peaceful look on his face, surrounded by loving devotees, having the time of his life. Honored, respected, appreciated, brought back into the fold, surrounded from all sides by the Los Angeles community of Vaishnavas. Because although he might have ran away from Krishna, Krishna never ran away from him. It happens every time. Krishna never forgets you. And so, although these verses teach a theology, although these verses teach a philosophy, although these verses have some value, you can learn another language, you can learn another culture, you can understand. We got to learn these A, B's, and C's. We got to go through grade school and whatever. Ultimately, these things coalesce and they come together in a harmonic convergence, and they become part of the beautiful tapestry of a devotee's life. And Krishna's in your heart, and he never forgets a little bit of service which is done, and he takes care of his devotees. And so for some reason the devotee has to leave this world, if that's their karma, if somehow that's the way it's got to go down, Krishna will come into your mind and you'll become peaceful. A great friend of mine, this is my last story, I promise. A great friend of mine, his name is John Riggs. He passed away. It was really far out, the story with him. I don't think I've ever told this story before. I don't think I'm going to tell the story now. I'll tell it afterwards. I don't want it to be recorded. But I'll tell this much. John Riggs was a wonderful devotee. Came to the temple a bunch of times in the early 70s. Saw Prabhupada in high school. And then boogied. And did all sorts of nonsense. Then I caught him 25 years later. So he was probably 18. He bailed until he was in his mid-40s. And I caught him in his mid-40s. And we got together. And he cleaned up his act. He came to the Friday Gita class every single Friday. Came to the Sunday feast every single Sunday. He took care of the temple garden. He used to grow vegetables and bring them to me. He'd make salsa and do all sorts, like make jams and bring them to me. We were super friendly. Super friendly. He was a big strapping guy, 6'4", 240 pounds, big barrel chest, was a lifetime surfer, local from Laguna Beach. Loud, strong, intelligent. Just the kind of people I like hanging out with. And so, and he got cancer. I found out he got cancer. Started losing weight. I'm like, man, you're looking svelte. But then he started looking too skinny. I'm like, what's going on? He's like, I don't know. And I'm like, okay, go and get a CAT scan done. I arranged for him to get a CAT scan done. Then I arranged for a friend of mine who's a radiologist to look at the CAT scan. And I'm the one who told him that he had terminal cancer. He had a couple of young kids at the time, a young wife. He was really bummed out. She was from Brazil, super sweet lady. I had to tell him he was passing away. He cried in my arms. Like a big strapping man was like reduced to crying in my arms. And he went through it, man. He had doubts about everything. He fought to hold on. He was in denial. He was afraid. And then when it came time to die, it was just like magical thing happened. He got peaceful. His doubts went away. He understood it was his time. He had a big smile on his face. He didn't take any medication that day. He said, it's my time to go. And he had a big smile on his face. And he passed away. In front of me, there was a big smile on his face. Happy. Holding his wife's hand, peaceful, ready to go. He was so worried about leaving her. But at the end, he was like happy. He was peaceful. His whole body was glowing. You're going to be fine. Everybody's going to be fine. Just be sincere, do your part, fight the good fight, beat cancer, and when the do not ask for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. When the bell of death rings and it's our time to go, Krishna will look after us and take care of us. We spend our lives trying to think about it to the best of our ability, and Krishna never forgets about us. And everything works out. Okay, that's it. Good night, Instagram. Good night, Facebook.